The rain hadn't stopped all day, drumming against the cracked windows of the small apartment where Michael Reeves sat in silence. He watched the gray water trickle down the glass, tracing paths like the years that had slipped through his fingers, slow, cold, and unstoppable. It had been 20 years since the trial, 20 years since the laughter in that courtroom drowned out his truth. 20 years since he'd been told justice had been served, though it had never been served to him. He was 16 when the world decided he was guilty of his own suffering. The bruises, the broken ribs, the humiliation. None of it mattered. Not to the school board, not to the police, and certainly not to the judge who had called it a tragic misunderstanding. The bullies walked free. They were sons of men who wore badges, ran businesses, and funded campaigns. Michael's mother had pleaded, cried, begged them to see what they'd done to her boy. But all she got in return was silence, and then whispers about how maybe her son had asked for it, maybe he was the problem. He left town that summer, disappearing without a trace. No one noticed. No one cared. The story of the bullied kid faded from memory as the bullies grew into men, successful, respected, untouchable. But while they built lives, Michael built something else. 2 decades later, the name Michael Reeves resurfaced like a ghost. He returned to his hometown not as a broken boy, but as a man who had spent 20 years studying how justice really worked. He knew how to make systems bend, how to erase names, forge documents, and plant truths so deep they became indistinguishable from lies. He'd learned patience, the kind only pain could teach. He started with Daniel Brooks, the ringleader back in high school. Daniel was now a police detective, a family man with 2 kids, and a face that smiled in charity posters. Michael followed him for weeks, watching how he moved, how he spoke, how easily he manipulated the world around him. The first message came in the form of an anonymous letter, just a photo of their high school locker room, the one where it all happened with the words, "Remember what you did." At first, Daniel dismissed it. Then came the second message, a USB drive delivered to his office, containing footage of him beating Michael years ago. It wasn't real, not exactly. Michael had recreated it using old security tapes and new technology, blending truth and illusion until even Daniel couldn't tell what was real anymore. His colleagues started to whisper, his wife started to question, and Daniel began to unravel. Then came Patrick, the lawyer who had defended the bullies and laughed at Michael's testimony in court. Patrick's downfall was slower, quieter. His firm received documents, fake but convincing, that tied him to a massive fraud case. Within weeks, his partners turned on him. His license was suspended. He drank, spiraled, and by the time he realized it had all been fabricated, his name was ruined. Each man fell differently. Some lost their jobs, others their families. But none of them understood who was behind it, who was pulling the strings from the shadows. Michael never showed his face. He didn't need to. The world was finally doing to them what it had done to him, turning away, pretending not to see. But revenge, no matter how perfectly planned, has a cost. Michael began to feel it late at night, when the silence returned and there was no one left to fight. He told himself it was worth it, that justice had finally been done. Yet, when he stood in front of the courthouse one final time, his old reflection staring back at him in the rain-slick glass doors, he didn't feel victorious. He felt hollow. He remembered the day of his trial, how the judge had said, "You have to let go, son. Life moves on." And he realized that maybe, in chasing vengeance, he'd let go of everything else. Still, as he walked away from the courthouse, the wind carrying the faint echo of laughter from decades past, he smiled, just a little. Because even if the justice system had failed him all those years ago, he'd learned something they never taught in court. Sometimes justice doesn't need a gavel. Sometimes it just needs time. And Michael Reeves had given it 20 long years. Would you like me to write a YouTube-ready description and SEO tags for the story next? You said. More also ChatGPT said. He walked through the empty streets of his hometown as the streetlights flickered like dying memories. The town hadn't changed much. Same cracked sidewalks, same faded billboards, same sense of quiet decay. But for Michael, every corner whispered the ghosts of his past. He could still see their faces, those boys who had laughed as they shoved him into lockers, as they filmed his humiliation on their early cell phones, as they made his teenage years a nightmare that never ended. He remembered the day everything broke, the day he finally fought back. It wasn't even much of a fight. One of them had cornered him behind the gym, and Michael, desperate, swung a piece of metal pipe he'd found lying on the ground. The boy had been hospitalized. The others, the ones who started it all, became victims overnight. Michael became the villain. The police never asked why. The school expelled him, the town turned on him, and the newspapers painted him as a violent, unstable kid. His mother had moved away soon after. The shame was too heavy, and the whispers too loud. Michael spent years drifting through the system, juvenile detention, halfway houses, and finally a lonely existence, working dead-end jobs. He learned how the world worked, not through books, but through the cruel lessons of survival. And with every passing year, the fire inside him burned lower, but it never went out. It just waited. He spent years studying law, technology, psychology, anything that could help him understand how power moved in the world. He learned how to manipulate records, how to find secrets, how to erase himself. He became a shadow, no longer the scared boy from high school, but something more calculated, more dangerous. By the time he turned 36, the plan was already written. He didn't rush it. Revenge, he believed, should never be impulsive. It should be art. Daniel Brooks was the first because Daniel had been the worst. Michael wanted him to suffer in a way that didn't involve blood, just fear and isolation. He started with small things, hacking Daniel's email, sending anonymous tips to internal affairs, making him doubt his closest allies. When Daniel's colleagues started to avoid him, when his wife noticed the tremor in his hands, Michael knew he was getting close. Next came Tyler and Ben, the other two from that long-ago nightmare. Tyler had become a motivational speaker, preaching about resilience and personal growth. Michael attended one of his events, sitting quietly in the back as Tyler spoke about forgiveness and moving forward. The hypocrisy was nauseating. Within a month, Tyler's reputation began to crumble after Michael leaked fabricated messages between him and an underage fan. Sponsors dropped him, fans turned on him, and Tyler vanished from the public eye. Ben's downfall was more physical. Michael didn't need to lift a finger. He simply nudged the right people, an old debt collector, a gambling habit, and watched the man's life implode. When Ben was found one morning in his car, engine running in a closed garage, Michael didn't feel guilt. He felt closure. But as the dominoes fell, something inside him began to fracture. The revenge that had once given him purpose now felt like a shadow following too closely. He found himself standing in front of the mirror some nights, searching for the boy he once was, the one who had only wanted someone to listen, someone to believe him. But that boy was gone, buried under years of hatred and silence. Then came the letter. It arrived one morning, slipped under his apartment door. No return address, just a single line written in familiar handwriting. "You've done enough, Michael." His heart froze. He recognized the writing. It was his mother's. She had passed away years earlier. Or so he thought. He tracked the postmark to a small town 2 states away and found her living quietly under a new name. Time had worn her down, but when she saw him, she cried, not out of fear, but sorrow. She told him she'd known what he was doing, that she'd seen the news about the men from their hometown. She told him revenge wouldn't bring peace, only more ghosts. Michael didn't answer her. He couldn't. He left that night, standing once more before the courthouse where everything had started. The rain fell like it always did, and he felt something he hadn't felt in years, emptiness. Not the hollow kind, but the kind that comes when the fire inside you burns out completely. He walked away before sunrise, disappearing once again into the quiet streets, his figure swallowed by the mist. No one ever saw him again. But in the town he left behind, the legend of Michael Reeves lingered, a story whispered to every child who thought justice was guaranteed, a warning that when the system fails, sometimes it creates something far worse than a criminal. Because Michael had become what the system made him, not a victim, not a villain, just the consequence of their indifference. And long after the rain stopped, His story remained, a haunting reminder that when justice fails, revenge never forgets.